Black Arts Movement was a coalition of black poets, playwrights, and other artists starting in the 60s that became famous for being some of the most prominent pushers of black issues and black power. Poets from the era were artistic radicals, identifying with Malcolm X and the Black Panther movement as the most effective ways to move the black community forward. And in that decade of intense struggle for the black community, it's no surprise that it's been described by Time magazine as the single most controversial moment in the history of African American literature and possibly in American literature as a whole. For the books, the Black Arts Movement ended in 1975, but I would argue that all of the major check marks the movement describes itself by are seen in black culture today, and especially in modern hip-hop culture. So without further ado, here's hip-hop's predecessor, the Black Arts Movement's influence on contemporary black music. 1. Social outrage. Hip-hop is a genre that's been accompanied by political lyrics from the beginning. Part of the mass appeal of hip-hop is often found in rappers who tackle politics or speak on problems in the black community or society at large. Rappers like Killer Mike, Kendrick Lamar, and Joey Badass get a lot of their cred from how they speak on modern issues, with Mike's rap music and Joey's All-American Badass being as much expressions of total outrage as measured critiques on politics. But are artists like them the cultural exception in black art, or are they a part of a larger trend? Looking into it, it becomes obvious that the answer is the latter. The aforementioned Black Arts Movement, too, was often aggressively loud with its political message, often to the distaste of contemporary readers, and they preferred it that way. Take this quote from famous Black Arts poet Amiri Baraka, for example. He says,
"We want poems that kill. Assassin poems. Poems that shoot guns. Poems that wrestle cops into alleys and take their weapons, leaving them dead with tongues pulled out and sent to Ireland. Let there be no love poems written until love can exist freely and cleanly. Let black people understand that they are the lovers and the sons of lovers."
And that sound clip is wonderful in showing who Amiri Baraka was and what his movement was all about. Showing people what problems there were from the black community's perspective, but also being pissed off about it. It goes without saying that the same thing shows up in hip-hop all the time. Take Fight the Power by Public Enemy, or The Black of the Berry by Kendrick Lamar, or Changes by Tupac, or Babylon by Joey Badass, or hell, Rage Against the Machine's entire discography if you want to find some examples. Hip-hop spends a lot of its time being pissed off about the stuff happening to the black community, and rightfully so. But the message isn't ever just straight rage, of course. Artists like Killer Mike and Kendrick don't get called some of the best in the game for how angry they get, but instead, what they say when they're actually rapping. The hip-hop community often focuses heavily on having a message for the black community. As you'd expect at this point, that was something that was also heavily emphasized in the Black Arts Movement. 2. Emphasis on progressivism. It's a complaint that anybody in the rap scene would be familiar with at this point. You go to a hype song and you see people in the comment section saying, "How could anyone like this? This isn't real hip-hop. This is just dumb hedonism. It doesn't do anything for anyone listening." The whole new wave of so-called mumble rappers has gotten slapped with this complaint time and time again from academic sources as well as others. To quote a few people, take this excerpt from legendary 90s hip-hop producer Pete Rock on Instagram. He says, "Make better music and write better lyrics. College gonna target us regardless, but stop giving them a reason, or should I say don't make it easier for them. Y'all gotta start caring about what's going on around y'all." Clearly not happy with the lack of political takes going on in modern hip-hop. And Rock is part of a larger movement that thinks that bad lyricism is bad for the culture. Joey Badass also recently said on Twitter that, quote, "rap is in a very trash state right now," end quote, implying mumble rappers to be the reason. Joey asks, "Where are y'all souls at?" referring to the often thought non-substantive nature of some of rappers' rhymes. And this artistic standard in hip-hop is one that's long-standing and hasn't gone away pretty much from the beginning. Justin Hunt of HopDX explains this whole trend really well in his video on the subject if you want to find yourself some more elaborate takes. But what relevance does this have to the Black Arts Movement I mentioned before? Well, this kind of attitude for music that moves the black community forward was something heavily emphasized then as well. In his essay in 1968 detailing the aesthetic the Black Arts Movement envisioned, Larry Neal more or less says this outright. He says, The Black arts movement is radically opposed to any concept of the artist that alienates him from his community. This movement is the aesthetic and spiritual sister of the Black Power concept. As such, it envisions an art that speaks directly to the needs and aspirations of Black America. And what that quote really drives home is that the whole movement where Black artists are encouraged to push music and move their community forward has been around for decades. The Black arts movement drew its identity around it, and the remnants of that mindset are, too, seen in hip-hop culture. But notice the last part of that statement, Black America. You may remember earlier when I mentioned that the Black arts movement was tied heavily into Black nationalism, with artists having close relations to the Black Panther Party and other radical groups of the time. 3. Art as Black identity. It follows from that the movement had a lot of emphasis on Black identity and Black culture as its own separate entity from others. It goes more or less without saying at this point that I'm about to say why this is something that hasn't changed either, so here we go. Hip-hop is a genre that focuses heavily, almost exclusively, on Black issues and the Black perspective, at least from the conscious scene and historically. Plenty of the most talked about lyrics in hip-hop focus around this issue. Changes by Tupac, White America by Eminem, hell, even NWA was on their political shit with songs like Fuck the Police. J. Cole just released an album this week that speaks on what it's like growing up in a Eurocentric society, and he's guaranteed to be one of the best-selling artists of this year. Quote me on that. Hip-hop focuses heavily on Black politics, and it's something that even whites in the genre are expected to do. Remember White Privilege 2 by Macklemore? It was controversial, sure, but it serves more to the point that hip-hop artistry is something that is heavily tied in with Black identity and culture at large, even if you're not a Black artist. And when something that challenges this arises, it's been rejected immediately. For example, Vanilla Ice's rapid descent after people felt he was faking being about the culture he talked about in his lyrics. Recently, Iggy Azalea was thrown out the industry for being a cultural appropriator, and songs that deride Black politics rightfully get this reaction. What this kind of attitude does at the end of the day is reinforce hip-hop culture as a Black art form, and as mentioned earlier, this was something that the Black arts movement prided itself on. Remember that Larry Neal essay I mentioned earlier? In it, he says this as well. Currently, these writers are reevaluating Western aesthetic, the traditional role of the writer, and the social function of art. Implicit in this reevaluation is the need to develop a Black aesthetic. We advocate a cultural revolution in art and ideas. So it concludes from all this information that attitude is one that was founded in the Black arts movement, and its influence is one that follows to this day. The parallels that I've spoken about in this video, Black identity, an emphasis on progressivism within art, a social outrage through song lyrics, are all alike in this regard. What's found back then is found today, whether through mainstream reactions to Black music or through the songs themselves. The Black arts movement wasn't just a movement that defined a generation of Black artists, but the cultural predecessor to those that seek to do the same today. Thanks for watching.